Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll just go ahead and see what if somebody comes. That's great. Um, if we could mute your microphones unless you have a question, then we might not get the feedback and the background noises. Uh, Makes it kind of scary for me because I can't hear if anybody's there or not. But if you do have a question, just unmute your microphone and shout it on out. And of course, we'll pause at different places um, for questions. The big menu that we're going to talk about today, and this is the one that should take the bulk of the meeting, is user class maintenance, and it's in your manual, and it's going to be an 8B, and it's going to be either I may have sent you a separate section that's 8B6, which is just about user class maintenance. Otherwise, it's going to be on page 14 of the basic manual section. 8B is in boy. And user class maintenance is where the control for accessing Cyberlab is maintained. This is where we set up which users can access which programs and which programs and for some of the programs we actually tell them what it is that they can do once they get into the programs. And we're going to talk, and then also in this program section we can also design the quick launch icons that we see on our screen, like these down here at the bottom of the screen. We can design order entry module or commonly ordered tests for order entry. We can design a number of other things in the user class maintenance. The user class maintenance module is located in file maintenance, system parameters, tech ID, security maintenance, and user class maintenance. So you can take a look at that. Now, user class maintenance is a global function, and it is controlled. Whatever is done here, while may be specific for certain users and certain classes, and you may have a way to use that, you want to be sure that if you make any changes that would affect someone else, like I just did with Mr. Qua earlier, and we changed the admin user class to view only, so he wasn't able to do what he needed to do. You want to be sure and can clear all that stuff through Mr. Qua or his office. If you have user classes that are specific to your site, then you should be okay in making those changes, but they should be running that stuff by Mr. Qua so that he is aware of what happens. Now, in user class maintenance, you're going to see several options, and we'll talk about them probably in somewhat of a reverse order. User definition is where the user is defined, and characteristics of the user. We'll go through those as we happen. The user ID report is simply printing a listing of all the users in the system. So we would print all of them, and you can sort them by ID, or you can sort them by user class. I mean by name. And so, as you can see, we tell all of the users in here what their license type is, what their class is, what their tech ID is, what their inquiry client ID is, and any other information that's part of that is on this listing. The other options in user class maintenance are the class maintenance, and this is where we make a class of users that have access to particular menus, and then what they can do with those when you get there. Global password options are things that apply to everybody, and you get a chance to look at how you can limit the types of passwords you can use, and some things that are applied by everybody. Commonly ordered tests are things that a group of tests that can pop up in a window when you go into order entry, and it makes the test selection easier. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. Quick launch icons are these icons across the top of the screen. They are set up in groups, and the group of quick launch icons are assigned to a user. So when that user logs on, they have access to the quick launch icons, and we'll talk again a little bit more about them when we get to that section. So we're going to start with the global password options. The global password options are on page 3 of the manual, and we talk about password options for the system. The first one says that the password expires in the number of days. So a lot of places anymore are asking you to change your password periodically, so in order to keep somebody from learning your password, from going in and making changes with your password. And the importance of all this is that every activity that you perform in CyberLab is logged in some fashion. So if you go enter a result, even if you go into inquiry and look up a patient, that is logged. If you print a patient's report out, if you make changes to the patient's demographic information, all of that is logged and tagged with your username. And if your user password and username are known to somebody else, it's possible for them to go in and do some activities that would be attributed to you. And if they were needed to be questioned, then your name would be there instead of the password actually comes up. Someplace everybody has their own little own method of setting the expiration date. Some of them say once a month. Some of them say once every 6 months. Some of them say you know, less often or more often than that, kind of depending upon how the turnover goes. So in your case, you have no password expiration, so your passwords do not expire. That does not mean that a person can't go in and change their own password by using the procedure on the main screen where it says change my password. You can go in there and a person can change their own password. What happens if there is an expiration date? At that expiration date or just prior to that expiration date, you'll get a message that pops up when you log in that says your password is about to expire or or has expired, and it will prompt you to change the password, and then you can change the password. The next thing says to reuse the password in each section selection, and that's yes. Now, again, what that does is that once you've logged in, you can go to any one of these menus without having to enter your password again. If you have access to those menus, you would enter your password once on login, and then you can get to it. Now, the reason that the option is here is that there are sometimes you might be working at a terminal, and if you walk away from that terminal, someone else can go in there, change to a different menu, do some other activity, and it would all be attributed to you. So if you say no here, then every time you change to a new menu item, you would be prompted to enter your password. It's a little on the annoying side, but it is the safest option. So you would do that. The privacy statement at initial login. In the United States, they have a new law that says it has to do with health information, and basically what happens is there's a little option that pops up in the window that pops up when you log in, says this is a healthcare information, and you have to be careful what you do with all the healthcare information. It's a standard statement that's issued by HIPAA, which is our governing authority for healthcare information. And you have it set to no, so you don't see that. And if you don't have a similar law, then there's no reason for that. The next four have to do with the password. You can set the minimum password length. Now, the lowest you can go is 4. You can set it to higher if you like, but you can't set it any lower than 4. The minimum numbers required in a password. If you want numerals to be part of the password to help make it more secure, you can say there has to be at least 1, 2, or 3 numbers that are in the password. The minimum number of capital letters. You can also designate the minimum number of capital letters and the minimum number of lowercase letters. So you can define how complicated the password has to be, and with some applications like banks and other places that you log into, they get a little bit scary as to what they require that you have in a password. And if you IT people know that if you're logging into servers and stuff, they have some requirements. Some places require characters like exclamation points and hash marks and @ signs and things like that. So these are the ones that you can designate. Again, this is a global operation, and this would be controlled by Mr. Qua or higher up would make a decision in that fashion. Now, in addition to the password requirements that you have options for, there are some options that the system automatically looks for and you do not have control over. In your manual, they're listed down underneath this in the screen, and it says that the password may not match the user ID regardless of case. So if your user ID is patn, you can't have the password be patn. So it will give you a warning if you try to set it to be the same as that. The password may not contain more than 2 sequential, alphabetical, or numerical ordered strings of characters, such as ABC or 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2 would be accepted, ABC would not. The password may not contain more than 2 repeated characters in sequence. AA would be accepted, but AAA would not. So those are some of the hard-coded requirements for passwords. So that's the global passwording. Now, the biggest part of this is the class maintenance, and the reason we're going to go to class maintenance before we go to user stuff is because we have to have a class before we can determine what we can assign to a user. The class maintenance defines a class of users. All of the users that are associated with a particular class would have the same menu access and function-specific access. Now, in class maintenance, we have a couple of options. We have menu selection, which says which menus can this class of users have access to. Function-specific access. This says of the menus that you have access to, there are some menus where we can give you some control over what you can do and what you cannot do once you get into the menus. For example, you can say that you can have access to the test dictionary or the client master, but you can only look. That's what we call view-only access. Or you can only print out a listing, but you can't go in and make any changes to those databases. So that's what function-specific access does. Restricted test classes. This is a little bit more complicated. I don't believe we have any clients that use this, but restricted tests are such that you can restrict access to a user class to only certain tests or classes of test. So, for example, if all of the hematology tests were designated in the test dictionary as class H, and if we recall from our test dictionary days when we did our class, there was a field in the test dictionary where you could designate a test as being a certain test class. So if I remember where it is, it may not even be on here. Yeah, it's not turned on. If the test classes was turned on, there'd be a field in here, and you'd be able to assign a test as a certain class of tests. I believe it would live right here after 12 hours, but it's not activated because it's not being used, and we try not to complicate things if we don't have to. But restricted test class says, okay, so what classes of tests, what classes of tests is this class of users can access? And all it is you put A, B, C, D, or A, H, G, Q, or whatever classes that this class can access goes in here. Now, this is obviously something that you would contact us and let us know, one of the trainers, to know that you're interested in restricting test classes to certain people. The last two items, delete a class and add a class. Just so you know, you can make a new class pretty much at will. If you want to delete a class, you're going to have to go into the user maintenance and remove all the users that might be associated with it before it will allow you to delete a class. So the good news is that you can't accidentally delete a class of users. The bad news, I guess, would be that you have to go in and find all the classes, all the users with that class. So we're going to start again with the miscellaneous options, I think. Or not. Hang on a minute. Okay, we're not going to start with the miscellaneous options. That's a few pages down, and that's fine. So we'll go with menu selection access, which we go on to page 5. When you have for each menu access, and basically what this does is that it makes the menu available to this user class. If you look at the main menu, you'll notice that all of the things are highlighted. Anything that's here means that I can access the menu if I wanted to go in and look at something in those menus. If you had a user class that did not have access to a particular menu, you simply wouldn't see it in this menu. And this is a change from 7.0 to 7.2. In 7.0, you used to see all the menus there. If they didn't have access to the menu, then the menu would be grayed out. So if a user is looking for a menu, or you're looking at them and would like them to be able to do something and you don't see the menu, the chances are pretty good that they don't have access to that menu. So for menu selection access, it's a simple matter of going through the different groups of menus of each of the major sections. And if we recall from here, we've got these major groups of menus, and determining which menus. So we start in patient inquiry and inquiry, patient entry and inquiry. We would highlight all of the menus that this class of user would have access to. So this is Cyberprint. Let me tell you what. Let me go find another class of user that might be a little bit more. I meant to pick this one. So each of the menus that they have access to is highlighted. Now, my recommendation is that whether you use the menu or not, is that if there are menus in the system that you never use or that are not used by the system at all, just don't let them have access to it. That decreases some confusion. It cleans up the order entry screens and the menu screens. So if you're not using standing orders, for example, then you would take these off of here, and what that does is that changes when they log out and log in again. That changes that they don't see any of the standing order modules here, and you'll notice that I don't have them selected here, so I don't see those menus. And this is just a recommendation. I'm not going to change anything because this is the way it's set up. So, but it is something to think about. If you're not doing collections, don't have the collection menus available to anybody. It just helps keep things clean. So inside the patient entry and inquiry module are patient entry maintenance, patient inquiry, collection verification, collection lists and labels, processing held samples. If a sample gets accidentally held or on purpose held, this is a program they can go in to do that. So all of the standing orders, point of care. The point of care entry program is a program where you can order a test and result the test in one session. And it has to do with in a hospital where a user will go to a bedside and perform tests at the bedside and then come back and enter the results, order the test and result the test in one motion. That's what the point of care entry program does. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I am going to go, we'll look at the different fields and we'll comment. Laboratory management, all of the programs that are in the laboratory that are available in the laboratory management area. So for this class of users, if they're not using them, they shouldn't, which just makes it nicer if they're not there. Let me just so there aren't a whole lot of pages because it's just basically a redundant double check of all of the menu items that are in each of the different segments and whether or not that class of user should have access to those. So one of the things that it would be a recommendation for Mr. Kwa or for all is to go through the user classes and see if they're all there and see if the people are, if the programs, primarily I'd go through one pass and just say we're not doing, for example, standing orders or we're not doing collections. Let's go through and take all of those away from everybody. It doesn't do any harm for them to be there, but like I said, it just makes it a little more convenient. So they're all here. I would not expect to see anything in anatomic pathology for anyone because there's no reason for nobody does anatomic pathology, so they should be done. And if you'll notice at the top of the screen, you have a button that can select all or deselect all. So it's a pretty good deal. Now again, like I said, I'm not going to make any changes, but I'm just saying. And again, same thing with microbiology. You don't do any microbiology, so there's no reason for that module even to be there. And see on this one, there's a susceptibility report. And actually, let me look at mine, and we'll show you what mine is. And I try to make mine match a little bit beyond what most everybody does here, because sometimes people want to see things, and I can show them. And so, but if there's no microbiology is not being done, there's really no reason for any of these menu items to be there for me. Excuse me. So that's the menu selection. So the next thing we want to determine is for some menus, we want to be able to restrict the things that some people can do once they get to the menu. Now, so this is called function-specific analysis. In function-specific analysis, there are a few programs that, like I said, have it. And these, I think, we're going to go through them, although they're not listed on. Let's see. Yeah, there's a couple of examples of these listed on here and in the pages, but they're not all of them there. But I do kind of want to go through the ones that you use. Patient entry and maintenance. You first highlight one and only one, and then when you say OK, then it opens up all of the different options that you can do when you get to if you have access to patient entry. So one of the key things to look for is the word only, because if it says only, then that means only. So let's say that you have a clerk and the only thing you want that clerk to do is to put demographic information in. Now that would be kind of a very, very large operation, and maybe that's all they can do. But you don't want them to change it. You maybe want them to view it. So you may say only can add and they can only view, but they can't change any demographic information. A lot of places don't like everybody being able to go in and change demographic information once it's in there. Maybe the information is coming from an external source, and if it gets changed by someone, then it's going to be different than what it was when it came to that. And so you might limit changing to another source. And maybe this person here, for example, can only add demographics, and you don't even want them to create samples. So you don't let them do anything with samples. They can only do these things here. And the same thing with samples. You can have a person that can only add a sample, and there may be only change a sample. Now you don't need to highlight all of these, because if you leave them blank, then they'll be able to do anything with demographics, and they can do anything with the samples. Now here it says disable test deletion. That means that and you have to really be clear or careful when you look at these statements to make sure that you understand what it says that they can do. Disable test deletion. If you think about that a lot, that's like a double negative. It says it's telling you not to delete. So that means that once a test has been ordered on a sample and you highlight this, then this user class would not be able to go into a sample and delete a test. Deactivation and reactivation is allowed. That means that if this user class has the ability to deactivate a sample, and this user class also can go in and reactivate a sample. So you have control over who is going to be able to deactivate a sample and who is going to be able to reactivate a sample. This line here says live samples test only access. So we have a sample that's been created. It is collected, it's not held, so it's called a live sample. So if this was highlighted, this user class would only be able to access the tests of the sample. They wouldn't be able to change the doctor, the location, the priority status, any of the information on the sample except just the tests. Now these next ones are only access collected samples. So this user class, if this was highlighted, would not have access to non-collected samples, which would be samples that are ordered but not collected. Then this is just the opposite, only access non-collected samples and only access held samples. So if they place an order and they put this order on hold, this person would only be able to access the held samples if that was highlighted. This allows access to components view only. So if you right now, without it highlighted, a person can go into the components of a sample or a panel and they can delete certain components of a sample. With this highlighted, this person would only be able to view the components. They would not be able to delete. Repeat tests allowed. Repeat tests allowed means that if you, well, let me back up. The only reason for repeating a test is that you want it to download again to an interfaced instrument, to a bidirectional instrument. If you repeat a test and you put that sample back on the machine, it will be re-downloaded to that machine, so the instrument would be able to run it. Now, quite honestly, most people just simply put it on the machine, manually order the test on the machine, and everything is fine. So it's not really much not necessary for you to repeat it, but that's what that does. Okay to order user restricted tests. Now you recall that we talked about restricted tests, and we can designate certain tests, and you want to limit the access to a restricted test to only certain people. Well, this says if you say okay to order a user restricted test, this allows the person to order the test, but they still would not have access to that test for resulting, or to change results or add results. Disable the client selection list. This means that this user class, when you go into, say, order entry, and you bring up a patient, and let's go to, we'll just go to, we'll go to demography for grins. Okay, try this again. If I go to the client selection, if I double click on here, this is the client selection list, doctor selection list. If I go in, if I was to disable the client selection list, I would not be able to see that list. I would have to know that the number that I need to enter before I could enter it. Now, the reason for this is that in some of our clients are in a very highly competitive business, and they don't want their clients to see who the other clients are that are on their system. So they tell them what their client numbers are and tell them these are the only ones you can use, and then they do not get a chance to look at all the rest of the clients in the list. The prompt patient ID first option in order entry and maintenance, when we go into order entry and maintenance, if we say prompt patient ID first, that means that the cursor is going to start in the IC number patient ID field. If we say don't highlight that, then the cursor starts in the sample ID field. Now, this is in some of our clients, or most of our clients actually, let the system assign the sample ID so that they don't have to, they don't assign a sample ID. So they want the cursor to be in the patient ID field first. And in some cases, for clerks and people who are looking up things, and they may always be looking at something for the patient ID first, you can give them access to the patient ID field first. Let's see, gateway system printer for waiver. A system printer is a printer that's attached to the workstation you are working on. It's also, wait a minute. I'm sorry. A system printer is a printer. Yeah, forget what I just said. System printer is a printer that's associated with Cyberlab. So printer number 25, 35, 67, whatever it is, that printer number is a system printer. On the gateway order entry system, a waiver, again, is something that's used in the U.S. I won't spend a lot of time, but it allows a patient to say, I don't care if the government's going to pay for the test. If they don't pay for it, I will pay for it. That's what a waiver does. And this allows a person on the Cyberlab's gateway to place an order and print out the waiver to a system printer, which is a Cyberlab printer. If that's not highlighted, then the waiver would print to a local printer, I believe. Start cursor at the first field. Now I'm going to have to go out and come in again. But what the first field is that when we go in to do our sample, and if I create a sample, okay. Better use one of mine. Then when I say sample entry, the cursor is going to go to either the first, well, as soon as I get all this done, I think I got older. Patients, thank you very much. The cursor can go either to the first field. The first field is this field here where it says collected yes or no. So once we get to the sample entry field, the cursor can be here, If I say no to this, start cursor on the first field. If I highlight this, the first field is actually it isn't there. The cursor, actually you can't see it, but the cursor is right here at test code. So if it's not highlighted, the cursor goes to the test code field and you simply just start ordering tests. If I say highlight it, it goes to the first field, then it starts here at the collected yes or collected no. That's the first field. So that's what that prompt does. And again, in your case, where you don't usually do a whole lot of changes in the sample demographic information, and you don't have to go, most of your stuff is routine. You can come up here and change it if it goes stat. You want the cursor to start in the test code field because that's where you're going to enter your test codes. And that's where you're normally going to start. These fields here, batch and rapid entry, test repeat, batch and rapid, client repeat, batch and rapid, and only new patients in rapid and batch. This has to do with a feature that we designed for one specific client. This client had a lot of samples that were not necessarily associated with specific patients, or they were associated with they were tissue organs or things like that, and they had to do a massive amount of orders of the same tests by the same doctor on each of the different samples. And so this program, the rapid and batch entry, allowed them to do that without and saved an awful lot of time for that. Can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, thanks. I must have hit the mute by accident. I had to cough and I was trying to mute myself and I didn't. Thank you, Paula. So the next one we're going to look at in these fields is one of the result. Actually, the next page talks about the results, single results entry field, because all of the results entry fields are fairly similar, and I'll be going through all of these just kind of to talk through, but I want to go through some of these in particular. So in the results entry screens, we've made some. Most of these have to do with adding live and held results and getting at the results that are entered. Okay, let me see. Okay, yes. So what happens is that in single results entry, all of these things says I can add, and you do have to, because there's no only here. So what you have to do is to highlight everything that you want this class of user to do. Add live results. A live result is a result that you enter, and once you have okayed it, it is sent to the record so that it is actually posted to the result and people can see it. Change a live result. That means that a result that's already been posted can be changed if you highlight this. And delete live results is the same thing. You can delete a result. Verify live results means you can go into a result that's already been released and you can verify it, and that adds a little flag to it. This means that you have access to held results. So if you go in, if this is not highlighted, if these live result options are not highlighted, you can enter a result, but it will automatically be held, and which means that somebody that has access to live results would have to go in before it would be released. So this means that this user class can access a result that has been held and can release a result that's been held. And the reason for these options is that in one of our laboratories or a couple of our laboratories, they want to control or make sure that every result that's entered is looked at by at least 2 people. So the first person who puts in the result would put it in as held, and the second person, and maybe someone higher up the ladder, would be the person to release the result. So you would have somebody enter the result, somebody to release the result. So that's the reason for the next one that says no release of your own held results. So if you go in and enter a result as held and then you try to release it, it's not going to let you. The next one says access any text held result, which means this person would have access to any result, any text that held the result. Now, in the next 2 have to do with an erroneous result. And if you recall from the test dictionary that we could enter a range of results on each test that we called erroneous. Erroneous, and this is where that really gets controlled. If we look at the default ranges, you'll notice that there is an erroneous range. And if there is a range in here, that means that someone who has access to enter an erroneous result has to be able to enter that result. So if you do not have access to enter an erroneous result and you try to enter a result that's outside the range that's posted here, you're going to get a message that says you can't do that. And then someone who does have access would have to come and take a look and says, oh, that's a pretty high potassium. Are you sure that's the right number? Yada, yada, yada. And so if it is the right number, then that person who does have the okay to enter erroneous results would be able to come and enter that result. And then the next thing says erroneous result requires a comment. And so that means that when you go in and enter that result and it's an erroneous result, the system is going to prompt you for a comment, and then that comment will be maintained with the sample record so that you can say, yes, we checked it and double checked it and triple checked it, and that number is correct, and yes, we did call the doctor and tell him that this potassium was really, really high, or whatever that happened to be. So most of the results entry programs, if we look at our list of programs, will have these kinds of options. So the single result, the panel results, the differential, the urinalysis, the edit instrument results. Edit instrument results, I think, has a few. Let me see what else it has. Yeah, there's something to do with the auto-release that we talked about. This gives this class of user an okay to clear an auto-release failure for QC, but no release of your own. Edit new and held results together. If you go into what we have for edit instrument results, one of the first options is new results, held results, and all results. Basically, if that's selected, you don't have to worry about all results because it will automatically bring you up new and held at the same time. Okay, that's fine. You can do that. Hold only function for results. This is a way, if this is highlighted, then this class of user, when they put in a result, it's held. That's all they can do is held. And then the comments having to do with erroneous results. I'm going to go over a couple of these other ones fairly quickly, just so you know what some of the options are, because they are a little different. In patient inquiry, there is I'm surprised I didn't have that in my manual because this one is it. This basically says what is a person going to see when they go into inquiry. And when you go into patient inquiry, you have a list of things that you can see on a sample. And if we look at a sample, let me see if I can get my, let's do it this way because I know. Huh? Oh, that's because I didn't put it in right. You notice that there's history, there's notes, there's printing, there are options here. And so in user class maintenance, we define what they can see. We said that they can see the result history, the print history, the call comments, deactivation comments, all of the things that you have in inquiry that you can see. This clinical notes we talked about, I think in one of our things, these notes here that we can enter on a sample are just that. They don't necessarily, although they can, normally they don't. These are things that people make comments about a sample that they keep with the sample record. And once there is a note that's created, then you see view notes. And when you look at the notes, you can see this was entered on this date and time by this tech. And usually it has to do with some logging documentation of a sample. It's just a policy that's put into place. At any rate, from the user class maintenance standpoint, this allows the notes to be viewed, allows the notes to be entered, and then this one, notes create report activity. And if for some reason this change in status of the sample would require report activity, that means that the automatic reporting process would be started whenever a note was created. These here allow confidential tests. If we remember from our test dictionary, we have the ability to designate a test that's as confidential, meaning basically all it does is say that you have to have access in user class maintenance before you can see a confidential test. And again, that is a feature that is turned on or off in general parameters. And if it's off, we don't see it here, but there it does here confidential test, yes or no. So you'll get a chance to define a test as confidential. Where am I at? And then these are view demographics. If we go again back to patient inquiry, we have a demographic panel that we can look at the demographic information for a patient. It shows up in this screen, the information from the patient demographic file. If that gives that. Now these next ones here where it says disable, you'll notice there's disable fax, disable email address, disable regular printer, local printer, cyber printer. All of these things have to do with the options that you see in patient inquiry under the printing. So if we're going to print here, we can see that we have local printer, cyber printer, regular printer, fax, and email. Now you don't have email and you don't have fax, so this would be one of the things that you would probably disable the email options and disable the auto dial fax options so that they don't show up there. Local printer is a printer that's associated with the workstation that you're on and is not necessarily a CyberLab printer. So if you're going to use these three, then that way you don't have the option here, and you don't have somebody going in and saying, "Hey, email! Wow, can I email something?" Well, you can't because it's not an active program, but it is an option that's there. Permit any client for copy to doctors. Now, if you look at the printing option, you have this thing up here where it says "Send report to." Now, it defaults to sending it to the ordering doctor, but if you want to send a copy to some other doctor, maybe somebody that they're seeing across town, and you could send it to any doctor in the system. And what that means is that when I double click on here and everything's working all right, I should get a list of all the doctors that I can send the report to. Now, if I set the user class maintenance to if I take that off, then that means that only people that I can send the report to are the people who are associated with the sample. And in this case, there's only one doctor associated. So I can send a copy, and I can send him another copy, or if there was a other doc, or if there was copy 2 docs, I could send them to any of those doctors. Okay, and again, disable the client selection list. That's basically the same thing in that list, so you don't see all the clients. Custom questions and comments. We talked about custom questions and comments in an earlier session, and this just allows you to see those in inquiry. Ignore billing tests in the sample list. If you look at the sample list, these are all the tests that have been ordered. And if you recall from our test dictionary, there are certain kinds of tests that are bill-only tests. If you don't want to see the bill-only tests in the list, then you would highlight that. Just make a quick note here. Okay, that's the last one. So that's patient inquiry. Now I want to go through collections. We won't talk about processing held. We won't standing orders, billing order, billing interface. You don't have that. Patient admit and discharge utilities. This is a program we're going to talk about next session, but this is a program where you can do some things. But just show you what other options that might be available. This tells you that you can disable the delete function, disable the discharge patients function, and disable the change by patient sample function. And those will all make a little more sense when we get to those. Client master. This is the place where we can say, I only want I don't want any, want to control who can delete a client. You can say view only, which will give them access to the client master, so they can look at anything that's in the client master, but they can't change anything. And then access reports only. This allows them to print reports, so print a listing of the samples, but without making any changes. So for a person who you don't want to make any changes to clients, you would set it up as view only and maybe access reports only. And people who are able to make changes would, and maybe you don't want everybody to delete a client. Maybe that needs to go through some higher level of security. Those same kinds of things are in the test dictionary. Okay, I know. Sorry. Are in the test dictionary. View only and test deletes allowed. So I will leave that. The rest of it, you can go through those and you can take a look at it. Say, stick at general system parameters, basically system features. If you don't have that highlighted and you go into general system parameters, you wouldn't be able to see and act on the system features. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Now all of these, login, specimens received, specimen workup, edit, instrument and stuff, these are all microbiology for the microbiology program and of course the AP programs, which we're not working on. QC maintenance for quality control, I bet you that's just a view only option here, so if you only want the people to see that, then that's what they would see. Some of them are just that simple. So, but they are kind of important about how they get accessed. The next page on your manual basically we already took a look at, and that's the restricted test access, and it shows you that restricted tests for pull reports for class. That just basically, in the old pull and print process for printing of reports, this would restrict a person from accessing only their reports, or reports. They wouldn't be, not only you would not enter results for a particular class, but you wouldn't be able to see that. Restricted test classes, D and C, I'm not sure what that means here, but this means that this user would not be able to do anything with restricted class D or restricted class C. Since this is not active, I'll just get rid of that. And these are switches. If you ever do get to the point where you think something like restricted tests would be useful, we can revisit this. Now, the next page has to do with the miscellaneous options for a class, and this is where a lot of the things that sometimes get to be set and then reset and whatever. Now, if you look at here, the first thing says close program when idle seconds exceed, and this is 600, which is like 10 minutes. So you notice that we saw some messages that were popping up here that said we're going to close this screen in 20 seconds. That means that the 600-second limit that I have set for my user class is about to expire. And you really can't change that from happening. If it says it's going to happen, then it's going to happen in 20 seconds. There it is. Now I can't change that. Now I can cancel this screen, and then I can go in and look at it again, and then the 600 seconds starts again. So, and basically how it's set up is that it's telling you that we're closing the program. So once that program window closed, then it would be another 600 seconds, and then this window would close, and then ultimately all of these things would time out and get you back to the main menu, and that's where you would be set. Now, the trick in setting this timeout is to set it long enough so that it's not bugging the bejeebers out of the people that are using it, and short enough so that if they go to lunch and come back, it's not going to keep on that same program for that whole time. And to know when it does close the window, it does close the window correctly. It doesn't leave something hanging. So if you're in the middle of entering a result and you haven't said OK yet, and your 600 seconds times out before you come and say OK, that result does not get posted. It just backs out of that screen as if you had done nothing. So keep that in mind. The internal SOP and the external SOP link on the menu, if you had yes to that, you would see some links to, there'd be some extra icons down here. They are, SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedures, and one of the things when we first started experimenting with online documentation and procedures was we were going to give people the ability to put their standard operating procedures in for the laboratory, which was what we called internal SOP, and also for the facility is what we called external SOP. And so we would be able to put your procedure manuals have quick access to them. Now, one of the things is that it required a special program that allowed some kind of specific navigation, and et cetera, et cetera. And since then, this has become a little obsolete because now, with what you'll see in a few minutes about quick launch icons, you can create an icon that will link you to anything, any program, any document, anything that's residing within reach of the server. You can set up a quick launch icon to go after it. So if you have manuals or procedures and so on in that area, you can see that. So there's not much reason for it, but because the program still exists, the menu items are here. Collection list priority sample types. Now this doesn't mean anything to you. I don't believe you do any uncollected samples yet. That it may be something that's happening. But in a hospital, they may have an uncollected sample that's a stat or is a as soon as possible type of priority. And so if we put something in here like an S for stat, that means that any uncollected sample, there's going to be a window that shows up right underneath the name here, and it's going to be the priority collected samples priority list. And so every time this window gets refreshed, it updates it with any samples that have been added. And some of our clients will use that to say, oh, I have to run down to the emergency room in order to get a sample because there's the order for it. So that's what the sample. So you put in an S here if you want the stats. You put in an A in there if you wanted the as soon as possibles as well. That's the ones that would show up in that list. If you want them all to show up, then you put all the different sample types that you have in that window. So that's the miscellaneous options. Are there any questions so far? Anybody have anything about what we've talked about? I know that we went through an awful lot of stuff. Hopefully everybody took a lot of notes. And also, this is the time for the advertisement. Just feel free to email me with any specific questions if they pop into your head after the class is over. Okay, we'll move along. The next one on the next page is user class commonly ordered tests. Now you'll notice that on my system, when I went into patient inquiry, I have this box over here that says Pat's special tests. These are commonly ordered tests, and the way it works is that if I let me just bring up a patient. Normally, the way I order tests is that I just put in a test like, I don't know, potassium, and add it. or worse yet, I have to go into the test dictionary and look it up, and I find a test that I want to add, and I okay that test and add it in there. From the commonly ordered tests, I simply click once, and then I can add, and it's a quicker process for adding tests. Now this thing has use for the definition of the test as a commonly ordered test, or it can also be an uncommonly ordered test list. So because the way I've watched order entry clerks for many years, and these people, they know 90% of the test dictionary by heart. They know what the test code is for this and that and all of these weird tests, but there's always a few that they don't know. So they could create a commonly ordered test group for those few tests that they won't have to go in here, double click on the test dictionary field and try to find a test code for a test that they can't always remember. So that's the process. So they could stick that in the list. The way this is created is it's created by groups of commonly ordered tests. So we have commonly ordered tests. We go into the menu and we call them sets. So there's only one set right now, but we'll take a look at that. And if we look at that set, we can see these two tests. So I'm going to modify the tests. I'm going to add a test code. And here's where we would have to. Let's just say it's calcium. And we're going to add that. So we can put up to 20 different tests in this list that will show up in the order entry screen in this list. Now, and so we can put them in there. They can be panels. They can be single tests. Whatever it is that could even, I think they can even be a bill-only test if you need to add something like that. You can put them in here. Now keep in mind that the order that these tests are in this list is the order that they're going to show up over here in this list. So that if you want to create that, you can do that. So you can delete tests. You can so if I double click on here, it puts it into the field. Then I can delete it if I want to take it off of there. And then when I say that I'm done, I say I'm done, and it's okay. And so when we get our tests, and you can build as many, pretty much as many different sets as you want, and then each set, a set can be assigned to each user. The last piece of information on this in this menu is the quick launch icons. Now, I think for my money, in the last as many years as I've been with, almost 15 years with Cyberlab, the quick launch icons has been one of the coolest things that we've ever come up with. There's a couple of things that I wish it would do a little different, but it's still one of the coolest things. These quick launch icons are also set up in sets, so that we create a set and we can make these icons available. Now you'll notice the icons live across the top of the screen. There can be as many as 23 or 24, I think, in a set, and each set can be different, can be unique. We set up a set called the default. I always set those up first because the very first one in the list is always, where did it go? Is always the one that is the default. And the quick launch icons that are in the default set are ones that are added to any user that doesn't have any quick launch icons. So 22, I guess that's the max. So when we look at this, it's always kind of helpful if you use the same first 3 or 4 or 5 or so that are in the default. So when you create a new set, the icons for everybody are always in the same order. Now you can't stay with that, because there's certainly going to be some things. But the other thing is that the icon that you click, if this one is for patient inquiry, then you should use the same icon for patient inquiry in all of the quick launch icon sets that you use. This one is the Cyberlab Online Help. This one is Patient Entry and Maintenance, and this one is SQ, or it's a website. So in order to add or modify or change an icon, we click on the number. So I click on the number, and it brings up. Double click on the number. Okay. There we go. And we look at this, it tells us that it's icon number 5. If I want I select the icon for icon number 5, and it puts it in here. Now this is, I mentioned that there are a few things that I would change, and this is the first thing I would change. This is all the icons that are available, are the ones that are over here. Now I certainly wish there were more, and maybe it's just going to take my hounding over and over again. So you can select from this list of menu items or other options. So the way you can select what is this icon going to do. If it is a menu item, it'll take you directly to that menu if you have access to it, and you will be able to go. So if I wanted to create this icon as worksheets, and I would be able to pick the worksheets, I picked the icon, and I can also have a hotkey. And what the hotkey is if I put a W in here, then Alt W is always going to take you to worksheets. Now the problem I see with that, and you can do that, is that when I see these icons up here, there's no indication that the hotkey's not there. I have to hover over it to see what the hotkey is. And you'll notice that's a K for this one. or for this one there is no hotkey. So if I'm going to hover over it, I might as well just click it, and so I really don't have much use for a hotkey. It's one of those kind of features that that programmers thought about, but it didn't turn out to be quite as useful. Now, if you know what the hotkey is, you can just do an Alt-W, and if Alt-W is not some other menu item or other thing, then it will take you right to those worksheets. So it is useful in that aspect. Some of the other things that you can do, if we look at, let me just cancel this and we'll go into mine. One of the things that we have on our system is SQL reports. And I have created on mine access to SQL reports. And the way that was done was to find out where the SQL reports lived, and it's a website. It's on this server at http:192.168.11.21/reports or /reports, and that is where the SQL reports are. And so if we look at that, you know, in our list of options, we can look at a website, and that's what it is a website. And then we enter the website, and it will take us to that website. If I click on here, it's going to take me to the website. It may ask us for a password. Sometimes these switches will, if you haven't been into them recently, it can ask you for a password. The password is for the report user, but this one didn't ask, so it takes you right here. And we're going to look at this next time because there are some programs in here. And then these are the SQL reports, and these reports take that. What happens with an SQL report or a quick launch icon, whenever you access the icon, no matter where you are, if I go up here into inquiry while I'm sitting in that user class maintenance, and I go through here, and if I look up a patient and I do whatever I want to do for a particular sample, when I exit out of here, it takes me right back to where I was when I left. I'm still here. This screen hasn't changed. Nothing has happened. Nothing has changed. So that is what I think is one of the most powerful things about quick launch icons is that it goes into that screen and brings you right back to where you were. So you're in the middle of editing instrument results and somebody calls you and you have to look up a result. You can go right away to patient inquiry, finish what you're doing, exit, and still be in the same menu that you were when we left. Now, there are some more sophistication from this that if you have an external program, some of our clients have a fax program that all of the requisitions are faxed and stored by sample ID, and they can be looked up by sample ID. Well, with a quick launch icon, you could make a link to that program, and you could carry over the sample ID that is there. So, for example, if I was in patient inquiry, and I was looking at a particular sample, or if I was in order entry or results entry and I was looking at a particular sample ID and I wanted to look at the requisition, let's see if I got one here, 6, 7. Oh, there's the deal. And we'll just look at the next one. If I want to, this sample was activated, but if one of these icons took me over to that scanning program and I clicked on it, it would take this sample ID with it and embed it, and I could look directly at the scanned requisition for this sample. That's how some people have used that that feature. And that's, if you took a look here, every single program in CyberLab is available. Every single menu item that'll make a quick launch, what we call a quick launch or a quick jump to any program in CyberLab can be done from here. Anything else exciting I need to know about that? Okay, now that we have covered, we've created our class, we've created our default positions, we have We have created our commonly ordered tests. We've created our quick launch icons. We're now ready to create a user. So that's in the user definition. And if we look at the user definition, we'll be able to find out how these users are put together. The user has a name. The name of the user is associated with every activity that they do. So if you go into patient inquiry and you look at the history of this patient, you're going to see some information about this. This sample was done by AY, which was the person named Hazran. That's the name. And all of the history information we're going to look at. These things were deleted. We can look at this was an update. It was entered by Andy. So all of these things that we create in user class maintenance, that name and the tech ID is associated. Now in this menu we have some options with password. We can keep the existing password. We can enter a new password, and this is the only way that we can, if somebody forgets their password, all we can do is create a new one for them. We can't look it up and tell them what their password is. We can create a new one for them. And then if they want to go in and change it, they can do it. Or if we want to make sure that this person creates a new login password, we can select force change at next login. So the next time that this person logs in, they would be forced to change their password. No, I don't want to enter a new password. Now, the tech ID on an existing is just simply displayed here. If you double click on it, you're going to see all the tech IDs. Now, a little history here is that back in original Cyberlab, all we had was a tech ID. It was a very simple 2-character code, and we associated the 2-character code with a name, and that was what it was associated with each of the users that logged into the system. The user class maintenance per se was very, very limited. Basically limited you to be able to access a particular menu. You weren't able to do any control over who was in the menu, what you could do when you got there. There was even some limited control over what you'd done, and it was all controlled in the background by someone from Spira. So there's two options. You can either enter a tech ID, and that way that tech ID you can decide what it is going to be yourself, as long as you don't pick the tech ID of someone else, because then this person would have the same tech ID as somebody else, and then you wouldn't be able to know exactly who did what. Or it will tell you that the tech ID is already used. Or you can leave it blank when you create a new user. Like let's just say what we'll do is we'll create a Pat2. And I'm just going to say I'm not going to make this good so it doesn't remember, so I can put a password. Here's a good one for you to remember. I can leave the tech ID blank, and then when I say OK, it's going to tell me that the system, you left the tech ID blank. Do you want the system to assign one? And what the system will do is take the next in line that it made, starting with AA, and AB, AC, AD, AE, and so on, and it'll just take the next tech ID in line and go through all the tech IDs. And there are like 3,000 some odd different combinations that you can use between the uppercase letters and numbers, and I think they've even added a few characters that are possible. The access class, this is the class of user that this person is going to belong to. So whatever programs they want to access and whatever they can do, if this is the doctor class, that's what you put in here. There are only two user classes that are active. Use either a full user, which allows the person access to all the menus and whatever menus in all of Cyberlab that you give them access to, they have access to. The limited user is no longer, it's basically identical to the web gateway user, but the web gateway user identifies this person as a web gateway user, and the only two menu items that are available are order entry and inquiry. And you can choose to give them only access to one or the other or both, and then limit what they can do when they get in there. This next field, user status, there's active and there is deactivated. Anytime someone leaves the company, you should go in and deactivate the user, because that way, if there's somewhere ever they get able to get into the system or have access to the system and they want to go and mess things up, and their user is still active, they would be able to do that. So it's kind of important that if you deactivate someone, or if someone leaves the employment, their user should be deactivated. They can be reactivated at a later time. You cannot delete a user, because if that user was used and did some activity, you need to keep that recorded for your history information and your logging information. Inquiry client ID. If this user is, say, a gateway user for a particular doctor, then you would put in a client ID here. And the client ID, let me see. Okay, we'll just use this one as an example. If this one is in here, then this client ID would have to be part of a sample. If a person was to go into inquiry and look up a sample, this user would only be able to see samples with this inquiry client ID somewhere in the sample, either as the ordering doctor, the admitting doctor, or a copy to doctor. He would have to be part of that. The inquiry group expands this a little bit farther. In the client master, we know that, in the client master, we had a field where we could designate a inquiry group. So let's just take a client. And if we look at the order, I think it's the order options. Okay, I lied. In the result, no. Okay, here in the result options. In the inquiry group, this particular client, let's see what the name of the client is, Pathlab Cambodia. So we could say this inquiry group is PL-CAM, C-A-M. So if we go through and we make other clients, other doctors with the same exact inquiry group, and then in user class maintenance, I put in PL-CAM, then this user would have access not only to the client 80,000, but every client, every doctor that had PL-CAM in the inquiry group section. So that, but they would not be able to see anybody else if there weren't any doctors on the sample that were part of the PL-CAM group, or they weren't client number 80,000, they wouldn't be able to see that sample. So that's something to keep in mind and to be important. The department code is just a documentation, and it is a 2-character code that you can make up. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't control anything, but it does show up in the listing. So, or you can make a report if you need to with all the users in a particular group. But it's basically a statistical thing. AP pathologist ID, if you had CyberPath, which Malaysia has and uses our anatomic pathology module, certain clients can be designated as pathologists, and if this client user is designated as a pathologist, then it will react in a certain way to when you're in anatomic pathology. Quick launch icon set. The quick launch icon set, this is where we're going to put in the quick launch icon set. We're going to double click here. Okay, you go ahead. We can double click here and pick a quick launch icon set that we want. If we want something other than the default, we're going to have to select it and put it here. If this field is empty, it will use the default icons. So you will be able to, you don't have to put in a quick launch icon set for everybody. If you want a special set, then you would create the set and then add that set of icons to that user. Commonly ordered tests, if this user was going to have a commonly ordered test set, then you would enter that as well. Confidential test access allowed. If you're using confidential tests and you want this user to access confidential test information, you would say yes. Historically, our confidential tests had something to do with HIV or AIDS, and so we would designate those kinds of tests, and that would limit people in the laboratory from accessing confidential tests unless they needed to, and then that would give them access to that. Okay. I told you this would take a while. So that's the end of user class maintenance. If there are any questions, hop on and say, let me see. You can either unmute your microphone and let me know, or type me a message if you feel better about it that way. And again, just a reiteration, user class maintenance is usually controlled by 1 or 2 or 3 people per site, as long as you have worked out a process to whereby your user classes are site specific or something else that you can, so that you don't do something in Indonesia that is going to affect somebody in Singapore or Cambodia. Questions? Let's do a quick poll check. Everybody take their mic off and tell me who you are, because I want to make sure somebody's still out there.
Yes.
That sounds like Paula. Good. Mr. Kwa, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, good, good. Eunice, are you still there?
Yes, I'm okay.
Good. Mr. Teo?
Yes, yes, I'm listening all the while.
All right. And Mr. Tay?
Yes.
Good, good, good. Thank you, guys. Okay, now the only thing else on here is a quick review and of the lab system file maintenance. Now, I went over this process with Mr. Kwa while we were there, and we talked about it, and I think that it's currently being controlled by Mr. Kwa for all sites. We did agree when I went over this with him. You can go ahead and mute your phones or mute your microphones if you want. Now, we did agree that that we would control this function in from Singapore. He or someone from his staff would do this, but I think it's important that that everybody know about what's going on and what can happen, and if nothing else, somebody can pick up the phone or send an email to Mr. Kwa and say, does anybody run the lab system file maintenance? Lab system file maintenance is, I'm getting an echo. Let me. Lab system file maintenance is a function of the background programs that are the background programs that control some cleanup files. A lot of temporary files are created during the operation of CyberLab, and they are need to be periodically cleaned up because they can affect the performance of CyberLab. If you can imagine Let's take the load lists, for example. Every time a test that is ordered that is on a load list, that is that it's part of a group of tests that needs to be downloaded to an instrument, those load lists get created every time it happens, and normally the load lists are cleaned up correctly, that you order the test, it gets downloaded, it gets resulted, it gets posted, and they get removed from the load list. But every once in a while, some tests do not get cleaned up properly, and so they end up getting built up. And so what happens is that if the load list file gets to be too big, all of a sudden that poor little dog that's running and running and running, he keeps running and running some more because they're wading through an enormous size of samples. And so it's very important that this load list is cleaned up. Some of these things are site-specific. Some of these things are general. So we'll just kind of go through what the process is, and you have on your sheet what the options are, and you can make a note of it. And it could be that at some point in time, Mr. Kwa will designate that the load lists be the cleanups be handled by each individual site. But like I said, right now, this is what happens. So clean up load lists on or before. This is a date that you pick. Normally, under normal circumstances, we pick today's date. And the reason we pick up today's date, we're going to talk about when we get through here, is that we want to clean up everything that is no longer needing to be on the load list on or before this particular date. Now we have an option for a normal cleanup or a selected cleanup, and I'll talk about the selected in a minute. I want to go through the normal right now. Here's where we save ourselves from this date. We say that we only want downloaded tests. That means that this test has already been downloaded to the instrument, so we don't need it to be on this list anymore. This load list cleanup program is recommended to be run once every day to help keep everything running smooth. So when I say only downloaded list, that means that if it hasn't downloaded yet, and in your cases, many of your instruments are dynamic download, so as soon as they're ordered, they're downloaded, and the instrument has them. We can clean them off of this list. Now, some people will set this date to a different date. There's no reason to set it any earlier than 1 or maybe 2 at the most days prior. There's no benefit to it as long as you're saying only downloaded load lists. If you are saying all, which is something that is recommended to be done periodically, say like once a month, is to clean up all, including those not downloaded. That will clean up any tests that maybe got run offline. They never downloaded, they never uploaded, or they never, they uploaded but they didn't get resulted, so they never got cleared up off the load list. So you could say all, and in that case, then maybe you can come over here and you can set your date back maybe a week instead of that date, and that just helps keep things cleaned up. Now on the selective list, we can actually take a look at a selected load list, and if I ran it and said OK, it's going to give me a spot. And so the test code I put in here is a specific load list. Like in the case of the I'm trying to think of what I can think 9070 is the Versus cell in Hong Kong. So that's the test code I would put in there. Just make sure that's right. Yeah, and then I would put in the sample ID, starting and ending sample ID. What is it? Okay, what is it? The 75. All right. Well, you would put it in as a load list. I just don't remember the numbers. And then the starting and ending sample ID. And what that does is it takes specific samples from specific load lists. And you can put in multiple load lists and whatever. Now what the reason for this is occasionally we'll run a lot of tests that are maybe not downloaded. They run offline for whatever reason. Again, if they're host query and you go in, you plug it in on the instrument and say, I want this sample to do these tests, and you run it, you upload it, you report it, and everything's fine. So it never really gets a chance to get downloaded. Happens very rarely anymore because of that. So normal routine cleanup is yes, only downloaded. We use today's date and we use normal cleanup. Worksheets. These are usually self-cleaning, but this is something we do. We just put in basically all we have is today's date, and yes, we're going to clean those up. Now, I'm not going to run this, Mr. Qua, so don't have a panic attack just yet. Cleanup activity file. The activity file has to do with results activity. Now, if you're not doing cumulative reports routinely, which means that part of your routine operation is to pull and print cumulative reports, then this thing can always be cleaned up with today's date, and cleanup printing is not required. And with any drop down, you can tab, hit P, tab, and hit P, and it will bring that up. So that's the thing. Now, I'm hearing people out there talking to me all the time. Why can't we set this up to be defaulted so that we just open this screen and say OK, or open this screen and make whatever changes and say OK? That's a good question. I wish they would. And that's another one of these things that I keep telling. Maybe when I retire, I will make a big list of things that they should do to make the system better, and then they can't holler at me because I'll be gone. Anyway, clean up the call file. The call list is a feature that allows us to document the fact that we called the physician with a particular result. There are many, many different ramifications. I do not believe that you're using it. If you'll notice on some of the results entry programs, there are little red telephones that you can click on and basically document the fact that it's been called. Yes, that's part of the call list of the call reporting program. The call list that they're talking about here has to do with samples that are automatically put on a call file, and then people can go into a particular program and say, I want to call all the ones that need to be called, and then you go in and you call them, you document it, and then you can clean up this list. For our purposes, we just put in today's date, and just to make sure that if anything got designated to be called and didn't get called, and we always say not printed or phoned. And these options that you're seeing here are not necessarily the ones on your screen, because that was a generic screen. This results edit file. Very, very cautious. Do not do this unless you're aware of it. This one, anything that has come from an instrument and goes into the edit screen, this option will take it out of there. And so anything that was transmitted, uploaded from an instrument to an edit screen and not edited yet will be removed by this program. Now, you can be selective. You can say, I only want to do it for one site, this site only, or I want to do it for all sites. You can be selective and say, I want to select a test group, and then you would put in the test group code, which would be 9997A or something like that. But you want to be really careful. Now, sometimes this comes in handy. I find it handy when we're doing upgrades or when we're putting in new systems and I want to clean up the edit file so that there's not a bunch of stuff in there. Or you can do it if you know that you only want to clean up, say you haven't, the instrument, say the VersaCell dumped a bunch of information and you don't want to have to go through each one of them and clean it up independently. You can come in here and clean up the results edit file for the particular VersaCell at a particular site, and that way, because I have seen sometimes instruments when they reboot, they'll all of a sudden say, hey, I think I need to send everybody in my whole memory banks to the LIS, and then you end up with 1,000 samples in the edit file, and it's a real pain in the neck to do those one at a time, and this is a place where you can do that. And then when you say okay, the little dog runs and does its little thing and cleans these things up, and then you're done. You're done for that day. So that's that. I am going to exit so that that doesn't do all the stuff that I told it to do. And we are a little bit on the early side, but I want to let me just see. The rest of the programs that we have are very small, relatively short. They're not going to take very long. So I'm not going to go into those. I have a couple of agenda items if you want to unmute your phones. Right now, our next scheduled class. First of all, are there any questions about the lab system file maintenance or anything that we've talked about so far? Very quiet. Good. So the next class would be next Monday or Tuesday on the 19th of August. However, I know that Eunice is, or somebody's not, I think it's Eunice that's not available, and I am not available on that day. I have thrown out the 21st of August. I got an email from someone who said they're not available on the 21st of August. I also am available on 3 or 4 September. And those are basically the dates that I have for the rest of this. So does anybody have a preference that's here that those dates, one of those dates would be better than the other? We may not be able to get a day that everybody's available. I know Paula said that she was available. Whoever it was that said they weren't available on the 21st wasn't going to be available on either the 3rd, what did I say, 3rd or the 4th. Mr. Teo, are you available? Let's just go through the roll call here and talk to that. Mr.
Actually, I'm okay on 21st as well. 21st, right?
You're okay on 21?
Yes, I'm okay for that day.
Are you okay? What about 3 and 4 September? Are those okay also?
3 and 4, yeah.
But 3 no?
Yes, I'm still okay for 3 or 4 also okay.
Okay, good. That's what I need to know. Eunice, you're not available on the 21st, right?
Yes.
And then
Not available on 21st.
Okay, what about 3 and 4 September?
3 and 4 is okay.
Okay. Mr. Kwa, are you available any of those days or all of those days?
I have no problem now.
No problems. I know you're so easygoing. Paula, are you available for all 3 of those days, or does it matter?
I think it's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
I'm just taking a note down here. Mr. Tay, you have any preference?
Yeah, all days okay. All days okay.
Okay. Now, Sovani and Eva, I don't have. So because I think if they're all okay except for Eunice and me, why don't we make it, we'll make it 3 September for the last class.
Right. We just mark it down, right? 3 of September, right?
Yes. I will send out another meeting notice with the summary tonight, and we'll make the next class, which is the last class, for 3 September. And because it's the last class, we have a lot of different programs, but they're very short and quick programs that I have left to go through. But if they're, and I think you have a list of those programs, I would like you to think about what we've talked about. Number one, if there are menu items that are not on the list that we have not covered in the last 6 classes, let me know. I can certainly take some time to go over those menus. If there are questions you have on some of the menu items that we have already covered, please let me know, and we can revisit those items again and go through those things. And anything else that you think you need to know about CyberLab, please let me know by email, and I'll get them set up. I will be sending out documentation training pages for these last sessions probably tomorrow, and we'll get ready to go. Are we good?
Yes, okay.
All right. Thank you very much to everybody, and you guys have a great week. And we'll talk to you on the 3rd of September.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.